Uh, Real quick intro, we're doing the Agentic AI optimization of media supply chain workflows. My name is Geoff Pangman. I'm a media strategy senior manager with our media supply chain group and M&E practice. Also with Alan, who's back there. So some of our points of views around media supply chain, some of the work that we're doing with a lot of our clients, as well as with our Microsoft partners. So jumping really quickly in, we don't need an agenda. I guess a real quick caveat, I guess, is a good way to start this, and that's really that we recognize that a lot of organizations have put in real money, real effort into modernizing a lot of their tech foundations, their everything around the media supply chain. And this is not obviously dismissal of any of that effort. More so, I think the key message here to take away is that, when we're moving to modern infrastructure, in doing so, it doesn't automatically enable coordinated operations, obviously, and that's the gap that we're really here to address. So realistically, most media organizations, they don't have a technology problem currently, or in front of them as it relates to the advent of agentic and AI is across the media supply chain. What they have is a coordination problem. And that foundational pivot, really, that it's generally further along than the workflow and the operations and the governance around that itself. In that systems are more modern, platforms enable more elastic work. But once work moves across teams, if we look across to the bottom, once across teams, vendors, tools, insert concepts of deadlines, people are still doing much of the stitching and the manual activity by hand. So at scale, humans are actually the integration layer. And where kind of manual workflows, if you're checking on status, right, you're chasing metadata, you're reconciling versions, resolving handoffs, things like that. This is when operations starts to feel more precarious and fragile as volume increases, not less so. Right? So the technical foundation might be very modern, but the flow still depends on that manual coordination. And it's through this frame, through this lens, it's clear that we need to stop asking kind of what the new tool is, what can we add to our workflow. It's more so start asking, where is that operating model breaking? Where is the workflow struggling? And from that perspective, we typically think about the breaking point is it's sitting in what we call the messy middle. Right? So this is the layer that has to absorb things like QA, QC, localization, mastering, compliance, right? Everything right in the messy middle area. And when I say management or coordination, right, I mean the very practical aspects of knowing what the current state is of a given asset, knowing which version is valid for which market or which partner, knowing what metadata or compliance needs are necessary for a given check. In a lot of environment, that logic still lives in people, right? Spreadsheets, emails, tribal memories. And next, consider all the expanding scale also of the asset pressures on the left side when we think about more languages, more partner spec requirements, more rights conditions, never mind everything around output variants as well, more windows for given different versions of content, et cetera. And generative AI by itself, right, doesn't remove any of that pressure. And in many cases, it actually increases it. If we think about upstream draft creation, right, that gets faster, which means we have more candidates to work with, and they show up faster downstream. So the issue isn't more content. It's the more derivative complexity hitting the scale-resistant human-gated layer, which is why costs stubbornly stay linear and complexity continues to climb. So this is where automation starts to plateau, right? It can make an individual step faster, like the advantage of generative AI, but it does not manage the system. So that next shift is enabling that consistent management and orchestration really towards the agentic layer, or more simply, decoupling the pipes from the brain. So keeping that execution layer already where it lives across the media supply chain, but adding an intelligence layer that can help us see the workflows better, right? To be able to understand reason over context, to decide what should happen next and act inside clear policies and guardrails. And this is a different role than AI typically is played and what most people default to it. And when used correctly, AI just isn't simply about replacing editorial judgment, right? It's not about replacing the creative aspect. It's about reducing those manual joins. It's about standardizing the repeatable decisions and tangible expectations and routing work that typically needs human intervention, if not real-time involvement. So this is how to move AI from just a task tool into an operating layer. And this is why governance matters from day one. The requirement isn't just smarter models, it's secure reasoning, it's controlled execution, it's auditability, it's that human oversight of where the risk actually sits. And so once we have established the issue more so as orchestration, there's a couple other questions we can ask. And one of the key ones here is, what is the financial question that matters and becomes more tangible? And really what that question is, how does each iterative version, how much does it actually cost? We've been calling this metric the marginal cost per version. And really this is like it says, the incremental cost to create, validate, package, distribute every additional version from that primary asset deliverable. I know that I'm also kind of hand-waving over the fact that primary asset deliverable is often not defined by most media companies, but let's just assume we do get to the point where we have that. That gives us the opportunity to find this is a better number. This is a better approach than what typically gets used, which is cost per asset from the classic production-based spend for, say theatrical or many of the media budgeting. Because that's often distorted by fixed platform spend, shared services, enterprise agreements, right? So instead, the marginal cost per version really isolates what scale is actually changing around. We've had things like labor, vendor effort, validation, exception handling, et cetera. I mean, realistically, lately the industry has really been liking to talk about this concept of zero marginal cost of digital. And I think I imagine everybody here, and most of anybody who works in media supply chain would argue that that's a myth. It doesn't actually exist, right? In that every new localized file, whether it's a fast channel or it's a compliance edit, it carries some incremental burden. Whether it's something that was introduced upstream that you must handle in that messy middle, or introduces something that you must exceptionally handle on the tail end. And that's where value like marginal cost per value really gives the business, the value is for the broader business. It really gives them all the same denominator. So CFOs, finance, they get a unit measure they can actually defend and understand. Huge. Operations teams, they get a way to show where cost actually concentrates and pinpoint where real friction is. And then technology teams obviously get the opportunity to understand where their burden lies and what financial aspect revolves around it. One key caveat here, just to call out, is that when we talk about media supply chain, I really do mean a generalized media supply chain. So we're considering this for all types of video media in particular. So live, theatrical, episodic, scripted or unscripted. So a caveat here around live, just to make sure, like sports and live events, is that the economics, they're often less variable, they're less version-based, right, than a classical like VOD asset, but they are more capacity and readiness-based. So realistically, the logic still holds, right? You still need visibility into incremental operating costs. You need visibility into the operating burden created by each additional distribution demand as well. So never mind that, most live events end up as a VOD anyway. So if it's going to be built for different VOD distributions, whether it's localized, whether it's sports clips, whether it's an advertising benefit, it still lives within the media supply chain, and it still requires the same type of attention and human involvement that any other asset needs. So really what this sits into is this is kind of the approach, which is, once this functional baseline and the concept that we just talked about, the decision approach gets a little bit clearer, right? The question is, do we modernize? Yes, when the tech foundation is blocking scale. Or we transform and operate if the model is blocking that scale. But when both are true, which is very much the case with many companies across media today, then the blend, both are true. So that means the platform debt, the model debt, they compound convergence, and alignment and consolidation is really the only path to not only improved visibility, but also improved economics. Because the drag is really coming from brittle integrations. It's coming from fragmented data and poor telemetry. And if we need to duplicate those control points, the pipes need to work. And if the drag comes from fragmented ownership, the manual routing, the vendor sprawl, too much heroic people coordination, the operating model then needs work. So as in most real environments, the answer is typically a blend of both in terms of solutioning. And also worth highlighting that the form of the problem can differ by segment too. So we've considered this across different players in the media. So studios, they're going to feel it in global versioning, right? Title level compliance. Broadcasters are going to get it felt into continuity, into packaging, into partner handoffs. Platforms, by platforms I mean either content management, distribution, streaming players also, they feel it in the metadata conditioning, right? They have it in release velocity. They have hyper-localization for distributed assets that they need to manage. And live sports, like I mentioned a minute ago, also feel it in real-time compliance. Clip packaging, live to VOD, as well as peak window capacity and incident response and DR failover. So you have similar structural issues with different pressure points, which is often why a single answer often creates additional debt upstream and downstream, because we're trying to solve for something at a point without considering the broader aspects of the upstream and downstream media supply chain. So that gets us, so what? What can we do about it? So the takeaway here is, here's the fun part. This is not forced urgency. We're not creating a burning platform. We're not identifying and exacerbating any known issues. This is a real problem that media is addressing right now. We can get into another, I don't have these slides, but I could talk about, CAGR in media is ridiculously low as compared to comparative industries. Why? Because we're spending way too much money on technical debt. And that technical debt lives because of an inconsistency in workflow and across different content types. And it's a solvable answer if we can take a step back and not pearl clutch, things like that, but that's another conversation over a beer. So really what we're advocating here is, it's not advocating to jump straight into a platform or drive sourcing decisions. It's instead really making sure that we get that baseline, right? Map the workflow. What are the functional concepts that really matter? Identify those ownership seams, the reworking loops. What exception patterns are you currently using? What's the real cost of that next version? Or in live or next, what is that next incremental distribution demand that we want to account for? When we understand a lot of that through assessing cost and effort and understanding where the scale is breaking, then leaders can actually make the right decisions and in the right order, so that with the right facts and instead of opinions, right, we're modernizing, we're operating, or we're blending. Realistically, it's like we've talked about, typically blending. But the core message really goes forward into kind of a tangible tactical next step, or so what, which is how do we enable finance, operations, technology, a common fact base so they can move on and make core decisions. Because if we don't have that baseline, you're likely to get more reactive to supply chains. But with it, you can lead the conversation. Or you can more appropriately, you can respond when finance asks some of those sharper questions that the organization typically struggles to answer. And this is one of the things that you want to get ahead of before you're backed into a corner having to defend a roadmap that may not be defensible. So thank you, everybody. This has really been our talk, really where we're going with generative AI in the media supply chain. Appreciate you.